Oh, hello there. You're probably here to listen to the advantages and disadvantages of living in New York City. Hello there. Yes, my name is Molly. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be discussing with you the 5 advantages and 5 disadvantages of living in New York City. A little background about me. I moved to New York City about 3.5 years ago, and the first place that I lived was Astoria, Queens, in a boarding house that was also an Airbnb. So I struggled to find a job after my internships were over at that point, so I moved in with my aunt and my uncle on Long Island with their 2 cats, Bella and Theodore. Theodore is actually a burgeoning TikTok star, and Bella is just here for the pets. I stayed there for about a year, and in that time I started temping for a finance company called Credit Sites. Later on, I got hired as a sales representative at Yelp. So then I ended up moving to my current place, which I will not really mention because, but here we are. I forgot to mention here that I've been living in my current place for about 2 years now. I hope you find this video helpful and informative, especially if you are considering moving here. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section below. I will do my best to answer them. Alright, let's get started. First advantage. Transportation. You do not have to own a car. The subway goes just about everywhere, and if it doesn't, then there are also buses that you can take. It's around $120 a month for the unlimited monthly pass. Your entire transportation cost for the year, if you're only doing the bus and the subway, will be around $1,500 total.
Hey, that's pretty good.
There are also plenty of trains that are connected to the city through Penn Station and Grand Central, so you know, if you wanted to take a trip over to Philly or Baltimore or down to DC or up to Boston, you can easily do that here. There are also 5 airports throughout New York City, and oftentimes it's easier to find a direct flight. There are more options for flights that are available, and sometimes you can get really good deals on prices, like flying out of Newark in New Jersey might actually be cheaper than flying out of, say, JFK or LaGuardia. Another advantage of transportation are the rideshare services available, and they're so abundant too. Usually a ride is within maybe like 1 or 2 minutes away. And also, of course, there are cabs. And this is not exactly transportation related, but it pertains to getting around the city. Biking is a great low-cost option for getting around the city easily. You just really have to know where the bike paths are. It's such a walkable city, and there are sidewalks everywhere. There are some parts of the country and even some parts of the world that do not have sidewalks, so that is one huge advantage of living here. We've gone over the advantages of the transportation in the city, but there are some disadvantages with it as well. The subway is really only meant for able-bodied people. There are stations like Penn Station and Grand Central where you're guaranteed to have elevators and escalators, but oftentimes they can also be closed down for repairs. Elevators and escalators are also not on every single level, so you'll probably have to take the stairs anyway. Also, when you're taking the Long Island Railroad, most tracks do have an escalator available, but you really have to know in advance where those are. Basically, if you break a leg or something happens, then you know, you're kind of out of luck in some ways. You know, you won't really be able to leave your apartment or your house. Thankfully nowadays, there are delivery services for grocery, and Amazon is also available too, but you know, it's just one of those things that is unfortunate about the city. It's really only meant for able-bodied people, and that really ties in with the walking and the pedestrian city. So the bus, though, they do actually have a lift for a wheelchair, but the bus can also be extremely unreliable. So can the subway, and that can be really inconvenient if you have to be somewhere at a certain time. Now with your smartphone, you can actually scan a QR code at the bus stop. It'll tell you when the next bus is coming, but I tried this in Brooklyn and it didn't really work very well. Another disadvantage of using cabs and ride-sharing services is that it can really add up and get expensive. You can use something like Uber Pass to save money, especially if you know you will be using these services a lot. Rideshare apps give referral code discounts and also have monthly coupons to help you save money. And also keep in mind too that it can be impossible to book during rush hour, and there's also surge pricing. Although this has probably changed because of the pandemic, but I'm sure it might go back to this at some point. Because there's so much congestion here in the city and so many people living, and you have to take a certain route just to get somewhere, it can take a very long time just to get anywhere. And also when I was commuting from my aunt's house, it was a good 2 hours each way. So commuting can also be a huge disadvantage, which obviously right now with the current situation, that has changed immensely. I guess like a side disadvantage is, yes, the city is also very dirty, especially in the subway. There are actual air particles that stick in the air of the subway that have metals in them. I'll put the study below because that's actually kind of interesting. And then of course, I've seen my fair share of rats and other things.
So I forgot to talk about this, but I'm gonna go on a little rant here. City bikers, I'm looking at you, tourists in particular. Please, 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 do not ride the bike on the sidewalks. They're meant for pedestrians. And when you are at a park, if there is a sign that says dismount and walk, please, for the love of God, dismount and walk. It's not that hard. What will you learn? There are bike paths for a reason. Stick to them. I get it, when you're coming to the city, it can be very hard to know where the bike paths are specifically because not every major street has one. And that's okay, but do your research before you come if you intend to bike. Rant over.
Even though biking can be a great way to get around, the city is still not 100% bike friendly. There are not bike paths on every single major street, so you just really have to know your way around. Bike fatalities and accidents are still extremely common in the city, especially among tourists. Walking and driving are very similar in this respect, in that you really just have to know your way around and also how to act on the streets if you do not want to be pickpocketed or targeted.
Hey! I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
Alright, so money is our next topic. With money, there are some advantages. Oftentimes, jobs tend to pay a lot more here in the city than they do in other parts of the country because the cost of living is much higher. A great example of this are teachers. So teachers starting out with a bachelor's degree will make around $57,000 a year with benefits here in the city, whereas in Alabama, a teacher with the same credentials starting out will make around $38,000 a year. So there's a big disparity with that, but also the cost of living here is a lot higher. Also, the minimum wage is $15 an hour here, which granted is ahead of much of the country, but personally, I don't think it's necessarily enough to live on, especially if you have a family to support, you have student loans to pay. And another thing relating to money is there are a lot of free and low-cost options. Museums have free or pay-what-you-wish days. The Botanical Gardens, for example, also has a discount for New York City residents as long as you have an ID that has your address. And then, of course, there are so many public spaces which anyone can take advantage of, and honestly the parks are really great. And then you also have a lot of public programs in the summertime, like concerts in the park and free movie nights in the park, although this past year they haven't really been doing that, but I'm hoping that this summer that will maybe come back, obviously with social distancing in place. And then of course the library system here is amazing, honestly. They have a great selection of ebooks and audiobooks to choose from, so that's another great thing. And the libraries are all public spaces. The disadvantages of money in New York City. So the city can be expensive to live in. Things like groceries or cosmetics at CVS can sometimes be quite expensive. Your yearly taxes, you will have taxes taken out for the state and the city, So that's another thing to keep in mind. And renting is also another big financial responsibility, especially when you are looking for a place. Now, oftentimes you have to pay a broker's fee, and you might also need to pay 2 months of your rent. Right now, rent prices are the lowest they've been in 10 years, so you may not actually need to put out as much money. Check out the YouTube channel Cash Jordan for some great tips on this. He's been a realtor in New York for like 10 years or so and really knows his way around the city. The other disadvantage too is that if you are living on minimum wage, there's a good chance that you would probably have to take on 2 jobs or more just to get by. Especially if you are paying for other things like student loan payments, or your rent is extremely high, or if you have a family to support. And oftentimes minimum wage jobs do not come with health insurance, and if an accident happens, then you might be strapped for cash if you're not able to save. This is not just a problem in New York, this is a problem throughout America. So our next topic is opportunities. So the advantages of this are, if you are looking for a job and you're relatively open to any field, you can probably find something. You know, there's places always hiring, from CVS to the local restaurant down the street to bars. It may not be exactly what you want. There are plenty of industries here in the city, so looking for a job, you'll have plenty of options to choose from and plenty of companies to apply to. If you're looking to go to school here, there are so many universities that you can choose from, and many of them have different majors and specialties that they're known for. You also have opportunities to meet so many different people that maybe you wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet in your hometown.
And now it's time to play Fun with Friends!
The disadvantages of opportunity here in the city is that if you are looking for a job in a specific field, like publishing or the arts, there can often be stiff competition because there are so few positions available and so many people are applying for them. Nepotism is also a common practice at a lot of white-collar jobs like finance and publishing, so that's another thing to keep in mind too. Oftentimes you have to know somebody in order to get a job. For example, I actually got my job at Yelp because of my cousin-in-law. Is that a thing? It was someone that I knew already. The other thing too about these opportunities is that some jobs really want you to have lots and lots of experience, and getting that experience can be really, really challenging. The other thing too is that internships are oftentimes unpaid here in the city. They are usually paid in the financial sector and like economics and tech sectors. Oftentimes internships are unpaid in the city, so you need to be able to afford to both live and be able to work without pay while living in the city for maybe 3 to 6 months. And that takes an enormous amount of privilege to be able to do that. Now, if you're already a university student, it might actually be a little bit easier for you because you might be taking classes while also doing an internship and have housing already. And if you're thinking of going to school here, that's another thing to keep in mind. So this segues into our next topic, which is there's something for everyone here. There are so many different communities to join. There are tons and tons of religions that are practiced in the city. So if you practice a certain religion, you can easily find places to worship. New York City also has over 800 languages spoken here. So if you're coming from another country, then the likelihood of you finding other people from your country to connect with is actually quite high. And there's plenty of other communities you could find here too, like around the LGBT plus community and many others in the arts. There's also tons to do and you will never be bored. Trust me. From museums to art house cinemas, niche foods, beaches, Coney Island. If there is a lot of construction going on in your neighborhood and you are working from home, good luck. Construction can also get permits to work on stuff after hours, especially if it is very pertinent to something. That can be a big caveat, especially if you are working from home and you have a lot of Zoom calls. You do get used to the noise after a while, like cars going by or like honking. Sometimes you might be on a busy route for firemen, so you might hear the fire trucks going by at like random times throughout the day. Same with ambulances. If you're near a hospital, you're going to be hearing ambulances so many times. The other thing too, if you live above a bar, club, or restaurant, that can also be especially noisy, especially in the summertime. And obviously right now with COVID, there are more restaurants outside. You can also wind up with noisy neighbors, and that can be a big problem too. Or if they have a loud dog that's barking. That is one of the caveats of living within close proximity to so many different people. Another advantage is that you can find any type of food in the city, from Arabic coffee out in Queens to amazing homemade Italian food in the Bronx. You can find just about any type of food here in the city, which is really great, especially if you're coming from another country and you miss some of the foods from your home. And also, if you are kind of a foodie and you love trying new things, there's so many different delivery apps that you can use, and oftentimes you can also order your groceries online and it'll just be dropped off right at your door. So you have a ton of convenience in that. Probably the biggest disadvantage of the city is loneliness. You know, it's so easy to isolate yourself, especially during this time with the pandemic. There's a certain anonymity people have in any major city, but especially here since there are so many people. And in some ways that is kind of a nice thing, especially if you came from a very small hometown where everybody knew your name. Sometimes you wanna go where nobody knows your name can sometimes be liberating in a way. Friendships can also be extremely fleeting in the city. So you might be friends with someone through work and then you leave or they leave and then you never hear from them again. And that's actually a very common thing. The one thing that I've found too with social connections in the city, they can often feel transactional, I guess, like they're only using you to maybe get a job somewhere, or you're only using them to get a job somewhere else. That kind of plays into the hustle culture that's here too. It's very common in most industries to work more than 40 hours a week, usually 50 or 60 hours a week. Even in very high-paying white-collar jobs, like in finance, you might be expected to work much longer hours. And also with minimum wage, you might have to work more hours so that way you can financially support yourself or your family. Working longer hours can be a detriment to your social life. You may not have time to make friends or meet new people. If you work by yourself, like if you're a freelancer or a content creator, making friends can be very, very difficult. Most of the friendships that I have made in the city have been through office jobs that I have had. Meeting new people in an organic way can be extremely difficult. There are apps like Bumble that do have like a friendship setting that you can use. I haven't tried it yet personally, but if you know anything about it, please let me know in the comments. So another thing I want to note about the Northeast in general. Now, I'm from New England originally. I grew up in New Hampshire, about 1 hour north of Boston, so I'm pretty used to the way people are here. Other parts of the country, people tend to be more open and more friendly, and oftentimes are really big fans of small talk. Here, that's not really a big thing, you know. It kind of goes back to like relationships seeming somewhat transactional. In a way, people really don't want to waste their time with people that are not going to essentially do anything or bring anything of value to the table. You know, people are not as open to initiating friendships at first because people are just really invested in their own lives and they just want to get from point A to point B, or they just want to get things done. So keep that in mind. Don't expect people to welcome you here. You know, I know this sounds very harsh, but I would rather you guys know and be aware of that than move here with false expectations. Now, if you're a student in the city, then you probably will already have friends that you will meet at your university, so that's actually a really nice thing too about going to school here. And I kind of want to just touch on racism for a minute, especially with 2020 and a lot of the recent Asian hate crimes that have been happening, which have been happening a lot here as well. Just because a state or a city votes blue or votes Democrat does not mean racism does not exist there. People make this mistake a lot about the Northeast. It still exists in microaggressions, it still exists in other forms. Essentially, I just wanted to mention it so that way people moving to the city do not have a false expectation or a false hope. And this applies to Boston as well. I think people need to be aware of that. In the description below will be some GoFundMe campaigns and some petitions that you can go ahead and sign in support of the Black Lives Matter movements and also the hate crimes against Asian Americans. If you know of any others, please let me know in the comments below, and I will definitely add them to the description of this video. Okay, so that is it for the advantages and disadvantages of living in New York City. Let me know in the comments below if you have any others that you'd like to mention. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it informative. Please check out some of the links below about the petitions and the GoFundMe campaigns you can sign. If you want to see more videos like this, definitely let me know what topics you'd like for me to cover. I hope you guys have a great day wherever you are, and yes, I will see you in the next one. Alright, bye! Woo. What is that? Weird buzzing sound. I'm sorry. Shut up! Do they have to be doing that now? So that's another thing to keep in mind too, especially. You mother. This is great. Okay. So oftentimes internships are unpaid. Mother. Wow. Really? God damn it, I should have filmed yesterday.